figured it out. I figured it out from black and white.
Yeah, we're going to talk about consumerism and Christmas. Christmas is the most wonderful time of the year, as we all know. Really, especially if we think back to when we were kids, the magic of Christmas, and it's around the world, and even in countries like Japan that are not Christian nations, they also love and celebrate Christmas, and principally for the gift giving at Christmas, something like 40%, 60% of annual retail sales in a shopping mall are Christmas sales. It really is. It's the Christian feast that supports the rest of the year economically. And that's something to think about, the way that liturgies and festivals of the church have so much power to transform societies. A few years back, I was with some friends from Greece and their little children, and we were at the Macy's Day Parade in New York City. And when Santa Claus went down in his sleigh at the end of the Macy's Day Parade, like he does every year, one of the little kids from Greece, he screamed out with so much joy, "Aios Vasilis!" I said, "That's not Saint Basil, that's Saint Nicholas. Kid, don't you know?" But of course, we have these festivals around Christmas in different interpretations, but they're all over the world. People take joy from it. It's nice to see that happening. It's nice to see that Christmas has so much power that even people who don't believe in Christ per se, or believe in even God, still are caught up in that joy and caught up in that magic and that wonder. So I want to talk about materialism, consumerism, and Christmas. I just want to talk about 4 categories of life first. I want to talk about, number 1, the blessings that come from having debt. The blessings that come from having debt. Number 2, the joys and benefits of living debt-free. Number 3, the joys and benefits of living simply. And then fourthly, the blessings that come with living with a lot of stuff. So I want to talk about all 4, and then talk about how to think about that. So let's start with the blessings that come from having debt. A few years ago, I saw a famous comedian on television, Chris Rock, and they asked him about his career, how he'd been, puttering along and not really getting anywhere, and suddenly he got big breaks, and suddenly his career took off, and he had a way to support himself through comedy. And they said, "What did you do differently? What was the issue?" And he said, he says, "It's just like they say in show business. Once you buy your first house, that's when the breaks come." So there's some kind of like an oral tradition that a comedian who's always living on a shoestring, waiting, someday I'll do it when I have money. Someday I'll settle down or get married or buy that house. But it never happens. That first you have to take that risk. I was really struck by that. There's some element of faith in the future that comes with going into debt. As I said, it's a risk to take on a debt for a house or any kind of a thing. And somehow taking on that risk can clarify your mind and change the way you conduct yourself, the way you carry yourself. He's a homeowner. He's thinking a little more seriously now. He's more open to maybe these borderline opportunities. We don't know the exact mechanism. But part of maturity is taking on increasing burdens. That's just a fact. That's what it means to grow up. And it's when someone gets older but they continually shy away from those burdens that we feel like, hey, they're stuck. Sometimes we have to take those extra steps financially to dress the part, to drive the car appropriate to the job. As Lucas said to me earlier today, he said that you should dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Sometimes you have to take the vacations that you've always dreamed of, even though you can't afford them. There is that element of life. We can't deny that sometimes that is kind of what part of living is, taking risks even in our consumption patterns. There was a National Institutes of Health study down in Bethesda, Maryland, about people who are able to make great changes in their lives, going from many, many, many bad habits to suddenly in a short time being completely renewed. And the people studying, they selected people who had done this. They hadn't gone to therapy. They just somehow had, quit smoking, lost weight, whatever it was. And at the beginning of the study, they said their favorite participant was this young woman named Lisa Allen, made a complete transformation of her life. And it started when she had just gotten divorced. Her whole life was crashing. She was addicted to many different things. And they asked her, how did your transformation start? She said, well, my life was crashing, but there was some money left on the credit cards. I mean, that's not how it works with credit cards, but that's how she put it. And I'd always wanted to see the pyramids. And she did, and she went to Egypt alone, and things got worse, but something changed in her there too, and she started a new life. So we were saying to the students, any therapist, any clergyman would tell her, you're crazy, you're in a hole, stop digging. But somehow that feeling of love for beauty was the beginning of her transformation. Let's go on to our second category, the joys and benefits of living debt-free. It's also true there's a great sense of peace that comes when we see our debts getting paid off, when we see them getting smaller, when we know that the money we're paying towards a debt is more and more towards the principal and not the interest, when our fixed monthly payments are sort of, fixed costs of living shrink. There's a great joy in that, to finally burn the mortgage, for example, at a parish. And many Americans are following this way as well. If you've never heard of Dave Ramsey, raise your hand if you've heard of Dave Ramsey. So a few people, go home and Google this guy and look him up on YouTube. He's very interesting. He just is a sort of apostle of how to live debt-free. He's a sort of a kind of a Southern Baptist style of person. He has a wonderful app called Every Dollar for your iPhone. If you want to track your spending, I use it. And it's really something to think about what he can teach us and tell us about knowing where your money is really going, learning to live with less, learning to delay gratification, having your confidence growing as you've paid off debts and put money aside for a rainy day, seeing what you really need to consume and don't. The app is called Every Dollar because it helps you track where all your money's going. When we're debt-free, we feel more relaxed about giving to others. We're more relaxed about helping the church in big ways. And then we feel a quiet pride in knowing that we're living within our means. So this also is, I think, a very important season of life, that season where you put aside those kind of things, you live within your means, you pay off debt, and you have that freedom and that confidence. And on Dave Ramsey's show, he has something called the debt scream, and couples or individuals who've paid off all their debts, they come down to the studio and they scream, I'm debt free. And they're so happy. So let me go to my third kind of way of life, the joys and benefits of living simply. Obviously, it's connected to the second one. Living simply can be a great consolation. Millions of Americans are trying to follow this lifestyle of living simply, right? Millions of Americans are trying to downsize, trying to simplify, trying to lessen the load of possessions that they're carrying. Many are trying to even go back to the land or garden. You even see whole YouTube channels and books and support groups about people doing stuff like, we moved out into the country to build our own house and, whatever, live by candlelight. And people are taking a lot of joy in this as well, of living simply. And I mentioned Chris Rock in my first example, and I mentioned Dave Ramsey in the second. And really the best person to read to think about this third way is Wendell Berry. Let me ask you again, just because I'm curious, sociological research, who here has heard of Wendell Berry? Anyone? Okay, we have one person. Wendell Berry, it's a shame he's not more widely known. In some ways, he might be the single greatest Christian literary figure in America today. He's in his 70s or 80s. He's a West Kentucky farmer. The book you would want to read is called The Unsettling of America. And his books are deeply, deeply spiritual. Plus he has a lot of fiction books and a lot of poetry. He's written many novels and stories. It's really a powerful thing he helps us see, to see your household as not just a place of consumption, but a place of production. A place where maybe you're growing some of your own food, maybe you're sewing some of your own clothes, maybe at a certain point, you buy the barber kit and you're cutting your kid's hair or whatever, but somehow to see your house as not just a place of consuming, but to think that there's actually a home economy We're saving money, first of all, because we can make it ourselves, but also we can make it ourselves. We work together. We're more than just consumers sharing the same house, but we're actually together making something through our own hands. And when we live simply like this, we discover that we have a very rich inner world. We discover that we don't need external supports. A friend of mine from Romania said that in the old days, in the peasant life in Romania, that after the harvest was in and the tools had been prepared and things like that, they had 2 or 3 months where there's really nothing to do, very little work to do in terms of farming or just a little bit of tending the livestock, and that the people there really had the time and the peace to read the Bible, and they would read it very deeply. And we know from the Greeks of Asia Minor and Cappadocia that not just some like religious people, but all the people would read the Menaeon. Like nightly, they would read the service books of the church, the lives of the saints. And when we live simply, those kind of joys and depths are disclosed to us. As I said, we discover that we are very rich on the inside. And the commitment to living simply can order and channel our family discussions about money. Like we just know, well, no, we're not going to just buy everything, every whim that comes into our mind, but we're going to, within these limits and these parameters, our souls detach from some of the noise. A couple days ago at the school, last week it was, we lost internet for 48 hours. I don't know why, in the offices. It was a great joy to suddenly have quiet in my office. Like, what was I doing all the time? But to finally go a little bit deeper. There's another thing I like about living simply. There's an old saying, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. And I have found, forgive me for saying this, but often it's the case that if you need help, ask a poor person. Forgive me, maybe some of you are bazillionaires, but many times the rich person is thinking, well, are you worth it? And did you think about this and that? And the poor person just helps you somehow right away. So there is something about living simply that helps us to share more. But let me go back now to the fourth way of life, the blessings that come with living with a lot of stuff. Because I've seen this kind of life too. I've lived it in little snatches here and there. And let me say something about that. To have flannel sheets in winter, that's just the best. To have a car with heated seats, for God's sakes. How can you live in New England and it should be illegal to sell a car without heated seats in New England? And I don't know if that's a federal law or a state law, but what are the politicians doing? Nothing. Just once in your life to own a silk shirt. Yeah, you got to do it. Yeah, it's the greatest thing. To go to a spa or a nice vacation, get a massage, sometimes a great music collection. To own a home that when people come to it, they're filled with delight at the beautiful home you've created. And I think these things are all rich blessings. I think they're wonderful to experience them. And it can be nice to give our kids everything that the other kids have. So our child doesn't have any kind of, jealousy, poor little me. No, you just have it now. Take that off the table. Sometimes when kids grow up with abundance, they grow up even more free of money. Because it's no big deal. They always had it. Live with it, live without it. There is something, I think, about living surrounded by quality, quality products, quality that can lift you up. I don't deny this at all. I think it's true. And then what about these certain class of products that we might like to buy? Like we were saying in the car on the way up here, companies are always trying to say, well, let's please the customer. But if you really think about it, the goal of getting rich is so that you can buy products from companies that don't care about the customer. Right? When you buy a BMW or Mercedes, they don't care about the customer. They're not asking the customer what he wants. No, they've got these fanatic engineers somewhere who are building the best possible car because they can't stand to build anything less. And so there is something nice about coming face to face with even material perfection. It does in some way elevate you to be around that kind of quality. And yes, in some ways it does glorify God to see the beautiful things that are created. Look, we go to museums to see the fine artwork of Byzantium, the best things that were made. Those things were, impossible to make. Only very rich people could create them and afford them. In connection with this way of life, I think of this saint, but I can't remember his name. Maybe some of you will know it. But he was a bishop, I think in Antioch. He was at a council of other bishops. This is maybe in the 700s AD or 600s, I don't remember, 500s. And a very famous female celebrity of the day came by, and a woman who didn't live really the best life. And all the other bishops averted their eyes. But this Bishop Nonus, he said of this woman, Pelagia, he said to the other bishops, I couldn't take my eyes off her. They said, well, what's wrong with you? He was a saint. He said, because I saw in her perfection and in her devotion to perfection how I must love God. So there does come a real blessing when we come face to face sometimes, or there can if we let it, with high quality things. I think all four of these ways of life have something to recommend them, to repeat what they were. The blessing that comes from having debt, the joy and benefit of living debt-free, the joys and benefits of living simply, and then the blessings that come with living surrounded by a lot of nice stuff. I think that all four of these ways have something to recommend them. I think that many times, for example, we wrongly condemn the wealthy without really admitting that their level of self-sacrifice and self-denial, the stress and strife they handle at work, are in fact much greater than what I'm facing. And of course I feel that way about everyone, because I live in a Greek Orthodox bubble where everyone is pretty much like me. But many people in their jobs and careers, especially if they want to get ahead, they're in a terrible competition. And many times this does produce a deep maturity, and they also have more to help the poor, and they drive a nicer car than me. So I think that we shouldn't easily judge others in a way that lets us off the hook. Still, the question is, how do we balance all these four ways of living? And the way we balance them is by forgetting about all of them for a moment. Look, life has a three-part plan, okay? It's very simple. It should be tattooed on our arm when we're born, but I don't know in what language. Number one, fall in love. That's, step one. Number two, find the cross within that love and carry it until you drop, and then carry it some more. And three, sustain this over time, absorbing and applying all the many, many lessons and principles and insights that you pick up along the way. Hey, that's the plan for life. 3 steps. Fall in love, find the cross within that love and carry it until you drop. And then 3, sustain this over time, absorbing and applying the many lessons that you pick up along the way. That's life right there. It's a hard way, it's uncertain, but if you live this way, you will feel alive. You may or may not be a success in the world's eyes, but you will save your soul. It's a simple plan. Unless of course, you fall in love with the wrong things. Because when we're setting out, when we're trying to shoot a rocket to Jupiter, that's pretty far away. And if it's, a millimeter off in direction at the moment of launch, then by the time it gets to the moon, it's already headed for Pluto. It's too late. So in this 3-part plan, the crucial thing is, what do we fall in love with? That's where we want to start. The rest of it, of course, will follow. It's not any of these 4 ways of life that should be our goal. I think because we're living in the world, unless we decide to become monastics or something, the goal is fall in love with God. Fall in love with your spouse and family. Fall in love with your work. If you fall in love in the right way with these 3 things, then in each of these ways you'll find a unique cross, in each of these loves, Sometimes the cross is to live simply and debt-free. Other times the cross is to take on the risk of debt. Right? We see that in parishes. Sometimes a parish, have been so careful about their debt, but now they realize something's coming. We've got to build that hall or what have you for the next generation. We have to take that risk. Sometimes part of that cross is to spend money to comfort others, like your own family. Sometimes part of that cross is to spend money even to impress others. Certain professions, you're stuck. you're in that law firm as a partner, you cannot drive a car held together with wire. My parents married at 22 and they had 6 kids in 9 years, so we were very comfortable with duct tape. And sometimes the cross you are taking is even so intense that you do need to pamper yourself materially. So I think all these things can be part of life. It's really only in the light of our love for God, our love for our family and spouse, our love for our work, that we can see which cross we're meant to carry, and we can pick and choose our way around these things, right? It's really in falling in love that we then know which path, at which season of our life is meant to be taken. Christmas is really a unique time of year when it's easier to fall in love with God. So that's where we got to start, and Christmas is a good time to start. Why is it easier to fall in love with God at Christmas? Because of Rudolph and all that, and just because of Santa, and because who doesn't love a baby? Who doesn't love baby Jesus? Yes. You can pray to teenage Jesus when it's your turn, but everybody loves baby Jesus. Who doesn't appreciate a surprise gift? Right? Everyone loves surprises. Who doesn't marvel at an unmerited intervention of love and mercy in our life? And that's what Christmas is, out of clear blue sky. Right? The hopes and fears of all the years are suddenly met in this perfect woman and her perfect son, and this humble guardian hovering over them. And it's all there. And everything we could have ever wanted, all our hopes and dreams, answered in a way that we could never have imagined. We thought we wanted a political messiah. We thought we wanted Hillary. We thought we wanted Trump. But instead, we got Jesus. You know, hey, sometimes it's good to be disappointed. You know, so what happens? All of a sudden, people wanted a better way of life on earth, but instead, they got God in the flesh. And when we look at the Christmas story, we can think something more easy to love Christ. We see Christ hungry and thirsty for his mother's breast. We see him naked, just a little baby. They're not born with any clothes. They're completely naked. And was he sick? He was not sick, but as God, he had taken on our human nature. Was he a prisoner from his birth? Yes, Christ was born into an occupied people, and a country occupied. If he'd been born 2 centuries before, it would have been a country occupied by the Greeks, and everything would have been okay. But it was the Romans, so ha ha ha. Just kidding. So, yes, you got to have jokes. Stranger. Was he a stranger? Yes, he was born far from Nazareth, and he was born with nothing but a cave to welcome him. There was no family in the area. They were on their own. So my point is, we see Christ hungry, thirsty, naked, a stranger, a prisoner, all these things. And what do we connect that with? Well, we connect that with Christ saying at the last judgment, I was hungry and you fed me. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was naked and you gave me clothes. So we see Christ in need, and it's a very simple thing. It's easy to love him there. We're going to see Christ naked and a prisoner again at his crucifixion. But that's a little harder to take and to think about the cross. Here, it's kind of just all joy. We see this beautiful star over Bethlehem. 2 years ago, my whole family, 14 of my nieces and nephews, and 4 of my brothers and sisters, and my dad, we all went to the Holy Land for New Year's Eve. It was the most amazing thing. I can't recommend it enough. It's either the safest place on earth, or it's the best place to die together as a family. You always feel very safe. And to be as a family and walk into the cave in Bethlehem was so beautiful. And it's very rare that Orthodox Christians are there, I mean, relative to the millions of people coming through. So if there's a service, they'll grab you all and throw you into the service, make you do the processions. Christ is there in Bethlehem. It's easy to love him, and it's easy to begin again our life on the right track of loving God in the right way and loving the right God. It's winter, it's cozy, there's shepherds, there's angels, there's beautiful carols. It's all very beautiful. It's a very good place to begin. You know, Christ came to take on human flesh. The incarnation is important because now all of you, inasmuch as you've been baptized in Christ, you have a divine life in you. There's a interpenetration of your human nature with divine life. Christ came so that he could inject his divinity into our humanity. We know what the word anthropology means, the study of the anthropos, the person who walks upright, the human being, in other words. But after Christ, we talk about theanthropology, the life of the God-man, Jesus Christ, and we have his body and his blood in us. So Christmas is super important. It's the union of divine nature and human nature in a mystical way that we cannot fully describe. Now, once we receive the body and blood of Christ, become part of his body and blood in baptism, and then again and again and through the Eucharist, something changes in us. Now we can begin to see that when other people are naked or in prison or sick, people who maybe aren't as cute as a baby Jesus, we must admit there is a divine force within us prompting us to serve those people. There's something, a strength in us we cannot deny that makes us want to love others. So here are my 3 magic keys to a special Christmas like the Christmases of your childhood. Number 1, receive communion on Christmas Day or on Christmas Eve, or as close to Christmas as you can come, because that's the point of Christ's birth. It's the incarnation. It's the union of God and the human being. So that is a special day when you've got to receive, and you've got to understand that when you consume the body and blood of Christ, that it consumes you back. It makes you, it changes you. It makes you more than. It begins to divinize you. And this is a fact that our saints have all seen with their own eyes. The whole point of the incarnation is so that you can become unified with God and have the divine power within you to fall in love, to live in love, and to learn from love, so that you become love. Number 2, you have to help the poor on Christmas Day, or as close to possible to it. And there's many different ways to do it, but here's a couple possibilities. Once upon a time, I was in Washington, D.C. at Christmas. I said, I want to see what Mother Teresa's nuns in Washington, D.C. do on Christmas Day. So I went. That was a very interesting Christmas. And what a blessing to spend my entire day with the poor. But even if you can't spend the entire day, look around in your community. See who is giving a free meal to the poor on Christmas Day. Volunteer, even for an hour, even for 3 hours. So try to have some connection with the poor on Christmas Day. Maybe your way to do it is to bring the poor to your house. Maybe it's just your own children who are poor, and you love them special extra. And another way is to go on to the ocmc.org website and look up the mission priests and the missionaries and commit to sponsoring one of them. Use your credit card, $3 a month. $3 a month, that's it. Anything. So that's the first thing, is you've got to receive Holy Communion. That's the point of Christmas, is the union of human and God, so that we can at long last have the power to love. And the second thing is you've got to try to somehow help the poor, even if it's just each other in your own household. And number 3, the third magic key to Christmas, is to be with others, and if possible, give gifts to others. Now, what kind of gifts? Sometimes it's our hospitality. Sometimes it is something we bought from the store, something we made. It could be anything. We live, every year we get wiser and we get better at knowing what would really touch someone's heart. If you're invited to someone's house for Christmas Day, if you can bring a gift that is a little extra special so that you give them that joy. It's okay to spoil other people a little bit. Why? Because you can't see it, but almost every person you meet is carrying a great cross, or they will someday. So it's okay to give a little more, to give people something nice, I think. It's not consumerism to do that. It's myrrh-bearing. Remember the myrrh-bearing women? They brought a gift to Christ after his crucifixion to anoint him because of all that he suffered. And when we give gifts to other people, it's because we honor the many real sacrifices and losses they've lived in their lives, sometimes from their earliest days on this earth, right? It's just a fact. Many of us have wonderful lives, but almost all of us have had some crosses and losses and pains. And when we give a gift, it's an act of myrrh-bearing to honor the dignity with which they carry that cross. That's why the final gift of the three wise men was, as you know, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The myrrh is for the anointing of kings, but it was also for the preservation of Christ's body after his death and burial. And this is the way to think about gifts. Not that it's the gift matters. They don't need the gift. You need for your salvation to give gifts to honor the image of God in the people around you. It's okay, it's like a story of, I'll finish with this story from the Desert Fathers. Somebody donated a beautiful basket of grapes to the monks, and the father was so grateful, he almost wept when the man gave him that basket, and the man went back to Alexandria or whatever. And the fathers thought, this is such a beautiful gift, I'm going to give it to Father so-and-so over the hill, another monk. And he gave it to him. And he was so grateful, he almost wept. And that monk left, very much joy. Well, the basket traveled all over the hills there in Egypt for the entire day until it was given back to the original monk. And he said, well, you see, there is still love among the brothers. They all wanted to give gifts, but none of them was possessed by the gift that they received. They all thought of others. Now, I have to tell you, I don't remember what happened to those grapes at the end of that story. It seems to me that to everything there is a season, and of course, ultimately, there is the life to come, and that's, our main hope. Mother Teresa said very nicely, that we should give until it hurts. And, but when you're in a family setting, you have to understand where that hurt is coming for each person in your family. It's not the same for every person. And one person might be comfortable giving away everything, but another person has their own set of sorrows, and you together you discuss, or if you're the parents, you think about what's within the limits of the strength of each person. Christ seems to have been supported in his ministry by certain wealthy women that followed along, and whatever is is appointed to us to live, like you said, to live it joyfully and with gratitude and some awareness. In the end, this life is very short, and then we have eternity. And I'm hoping it's going to be a significant improvement over this. One of the reasons the church gives us fasting, before feasts, is to kind of help us recalibrate our orientation. Like, well, what is it that you're really in love with? Remember your first love, and especially God and the people in your life. I think how you're in love with something is it's something that makes it easy to forget yourself. And the problem with a certain kind of consumption, and like you said, internet too, because you're like consuming all these images all the time. I mean, I am, is that it's really just kind of stuffing myself. It really isn't, not necessarily, but what we're looking for is things that can make us forget ourselves and launch out, get beyond us. Some people find, that, for example, in romance, that one reason that they might think a particular person is right for them is that this person, and vice versa, they help them to laugh at themselves, right? That freedom from fear about the self, is a sign that you're in the presence of love. you're not so concerned with how you look or whatever. You're just, it's about the other thing. I asked a person he's a bishop of the church, but I feel fairly confident that he's a saint. I mean, the miracles that happen around him. And I asked him once, I said, what's the key to discernment? And I was thinking, what is he going to say? And you know what he said? Experience. It was a very humble answer. He said, something's happening in the monastery now. If it had happened 10 years ago, there's a problem that he's facing, I wouldn't have known what to do. I would have been at sea, And he says, now I know. Call the police. Saints aren't, pie in the sky fantasy people. It was a pilgrim, quote unquote pilgrim who, was taking their hospitality, but then was like dealing drugs to local villagers, and the suppliers were coming. He's like, I wouldn't have known at the beginning, because I would have thought, we're a monastery, we must never say no. He says, it's 10 years later. We just called the cops, end of discussion. It was not, I'll tell you one story. He was a missionary in Africa years ago in the 70s, and they were going to some remote parish, and they got lost, and they got out of the Land Rover to look around. When they came back, there was a lion sitting on the front hood of the Land Rover. And they were quite terrified. And he was a young priest then, he wasn't a bishop yet, and he went up and he petted the lion, and he said to him in Greek, I don't know how to say it in Greek, but he said, my friend, he says, we're late for our party and you are for yours. And the lion just jumped down and ran away. Our sacrifice for others is supposed to awaken in them a similar spirit of sacrifice for other people. And we don't want that to come directly back to us, per se, because we're worried if we do, then it's almost just like, I'm paying back what you gave me. But that's not it, and that's this concept of philotimo, that we're trying to give our kids a philotimo spirit, that they're going to say, hey, I'm the kind of person, or my family's the kind of person that we help the person, someone else when they're down, and we don't count the cost. We'll make it up later. Somehow, God will help us make it up later, and for themselves too, because you're making a sacrifice for them. You want them to make sacrifices for themselves to acquire a spirit of self-discipline. I think sometimes we have to give a gift to a child and then come alongside them and dare them to give that gift which they love to still someone else. And it's hard, and we have that discussion, and they give it, and then we give them double. And I think those are the kind of lessons that we need to creatively do with kids and students, and get them to see that the life of the cross is a great adventure. It's not drudgery and it's not misery, but it's really cool. And it really is cool. But we need to be creative about how we show that taking a risk, is worth it. You can think of it as an investment, and that's how the church fathers said, when you give to the poor, you're investing. And your ROI is infinite, because you're lending to Christ, and that return on investment that you're getting is just, there's no limit to it. And we experience that in our own lifetime. Every summer, in the last 10 years, or 11 or 12, I lost count, I accompany our senior seminarians to Greece on what we call the St. Helens pilgrimage. They go to study modern Greek intensively, but we also go to Constantinople. We go to Mount Athos. We go to a lot of places. It's all the Masters of Divinity students, men and women. It's an amazing experience. So, I don't know, like in year 2 of doing this, I realized that whenever we went to a new city, the first thing we should do is go to the patron saint of that city, get their blessing, and venerate. And I think it was the 3rd year I ran the pilgrimage, and I was really hammering away at the students, so we've got to do this first. You cannot put it off. It's like going to someone's house and not saying hello. Your future priest, your future ministers, we're doing this. So we were marching up the hill to St. Demetrius in Thessaloniki, and just as we were sort of on this final edge of the hill, a parked car started to roll free. The engine wasn't running, it was just rolling. And it started to roll right at us. So we looked inside and we saw that there was a little girl who had somehow locked herself in her dad's car and released the parking brake. And I remember thinking, I thought that only happens in America. I guess that's a universal problem. Kids releasing parking brakes. So there she was, coming down the steepest street, and I was like, we're Americans, we invented the car, we can handle this. So we were all around the car or something, we grabbed it. But, they have not repaved the streets in Thessalonica since 1970 because they don't have winters here. I mean, the asphalt is smooth as glass. We couldn't stop the car. It was rolling faster and faster, and we were, the guy in the back was about to get crushed. So all the windows were closed except the one window on the front window on the passenger side. And just when it was too late to do anything, one of the students dove headfirst into the open window. And I was like, wow, I said to myself, time slows down. I said, that guy must be a professional diver. I mean, his dive was so good. And it turned out he was an LA lifeguard that had come to seminary. And anyway, so, whatever, I was very shook up. But it was a nice example. If we had not been there at that precise moment, if we had put off going to visit the saint, I often think, what would have happened? And that's a very, vivid example. That's a real story that happened to me. But I think it's true in many things in life. If we don't put God first, the world is not the way it's supposed to be. And her father came running. And actually, it was so interesting because of the 8 or 9 students who were with me at that moment and stopped the car, one was in a full Kalamafi robed deacon on the one side, one was a full Kalamafi deacon on this side, and one was a full Kalamafi priest on this side. And as we caught the car, my mind was going so fast because it was a difficult situation, and I thought to myself, who is that little girl that when her, life was in danger, God sent 2 deacons and a priest to catch her? I said, I want to come back in 30 years and figure out who she was. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. I wish you a Merry Christmas, and I hope to meet you all again soon.
I figured it out from black